The first sign wasn't a shadow falling over a city or a thunderous boom from the heavens. It was a sound, a single resonant chord that bloomed in the mind of every living human at the same instant. It was a note of impossible purity, a hum that seemed to vibrate not in the ears, but in the very marrow of the bones. For 12 seconds, the world stood still. Cars drifted to a halt on highways. Surgeons paused with scalpels held aloft, and arguments died in the throats of warring politicians. In that shared, global moment of profound and inexplicable harmony, we felt a peace that our species had never known. Then, as the sound faded, the sky began to change. The familiar blue bled into hues of violet and rose, and, great, shimmering veils of light descended, weaving through the clouds like celestial silk. They weren't ships, not in any way we understood the term. They were more like living auroras, vast, ethereal beings of light and energy that draped themselves across the stratosphere. They were beautiful, terrifyingly so, and their beauty was the first weapon they used against us. They called themselves the Lumina, and they did not come to conquer, but to curate. Their message, when it arrived, was not broadcast over our primitive networks, but spoken directly into our minds, the same way their first chord had been. The voice was neither male nor female, but a symphony of whispers and warmth, a parent soothing a frightened child, beings of earth. It resonated within our skulls. We have observed your struggle. We have felt your pain, your division, your slow march toward self-extinction. Your world is a rare and precious work of art, but its canvas is cracking, its colors fading. We are the curators. We travel the dark spaces between stars not to claim territory, but to preserve unique life, to mend what is broken, and to elevate what is beautiful. They offered us a pact. They would end our wars, heal our poisoned planet, cure our diseases, and erase our poverty. They would give us a world without suffering, a paradise of our own making, guided by their benevolent wisdom. In return, they asked for only one thing: our trust. They asked us to accept their stewardship, to allow them to harmonize our existence, to prune the discordant branches of our nature so that the true beauty of humanity could flourish. We were a species on its knees, choking on the fumes of our own progress, and they offered us a gentle hand up. Exhausted and desperate, humanity accepted. We welcomed our saviors with open arms. My name is Kalen, and I was a data archivist at the Global Strategic Archive, a fancy title for a glorified librarian of humanity's collective memory. In an age of instant data streams and neural-linked histories, my job was already an anachronism. I was a custodian of the physical, the tangible, the uneditable. While the world consumed history through filtered, algorithm-driven narratives, I spent my days in the climate-controlled silence of the deep vaults, surrounded by the scent of aging paper, magnetic tape, and celluloid. I cared for the things that could not be easily altered. First edition books still bearing the acidic tang of their ink, master copies of films in heavy metal canisters, and the cold, dense weight of offline servers containing the raw, chaotic data of our past. I loved the feel of a worn book cover beneath my fingers, the knowledge that the smudges on its pages were left by hands long turned to dust. It was a connection, a testament to the messy, imperfect, and glorious continuum of human experience. When the Lumina arrived, the archive, like so many other institutions, was deemed obsolete. Why cling to a painful past when a perfect future was at hand? The building was slated for decommissioning, and I was given the final task of overseeing the ascension of its contents into the Lumina's universal network, a process they assured us would preserve everything forever in a flawless, accessible format. The changes came swiftly, just as promised. The skies cleared to a brilliant, crystalline blue. The oceans, once choked with our refuse, ran clean and teemed with life. The great deserts bloomed with impossible flora. Hunger became a word children learned in history lessons, which themselves were becoming brighter, simpler, and far less troubling. The Lumina were true to their word. They gave us peace. They gave us plenty. And they gave us the harmony bands. They appeared one day, left on the doorstep of every home, a gift for every man, right, woman, and child. They were beautiful things, elegant bracelets of a smooth, pearlescent material that shifted in color with the wearer's mood. They were. The Lumina explained in that gentle voice inside our heads, wellness monitors. They would track our health, our sleep patterns, and our emotional states, allowing the Lumina to better care for our needs. Slip one on, and a wave of calm washed over you. The jagged edges of anxiety were smoothed away. The hollow ache of grief was filled with a soft, warm light. The fire of anger was banked into a gentle, harmless ember. It was a world without sharp corners, a life without emotional friction, and people loved it. They embraced the tranquility, the easy, smiling existence that the bands provided. But in the quiet solitude of the archive's vaults, my own band felt less like a gift and more like a censor. I would be handling a file containing eyewitness accounts of a brutal 21st century conflict, the raw, unfiltered descriptions of fear and loss, and I would feel the band on my wrist grow warm. A gentle, placid sensation would seep into my veins, urging me to move on, to think of something more pleasant. The horror of the testimony would recede, replaced by a vague, detached sympathy. It was happening to our history, too. As I began the process of uploading the digital archives, I started running comparisons. I would pull up a historical event on the public network, now managed by the Lumina, and compare it to the original, offline data in my servers. The discrepancies were subtle at first, then chillingly audacious. A bloody revolution was no longer a desperate, violent struggle for freedom, but a period of societal restructuring. A brilliant but ruthless leader had his atrocities softened into difficult but necessary administrative decisions. And the great pandemics were not remembered for the terror and the millions of dead, but as opportunities for global cooperation and scientific advancement. The Lumina were not just curating our future, they were meticulously, systematically curating our past, sanding down every rough edge, painting over every dark corner, until what remained was a sanitized, passionless, and utterly dishonest version of who we were. It was during one of these late-night, clandestine comparisons that I met Alara. The music wing of the archive was a place I rarely visited, a section filled with master recordings and original sheet music. I heard a sound cutting through the oppressive silence of the vault, a single, mournful cello note, played with such raw, aching sorrow that it felt like it bypassed my ears and pierced me straight through the heart. The note was so full of pain and beauty that my harmony band pulsed frantically, trying to quell the secondhand grief it was causing me. I followed the sound and found her in a listening room, a vintage cello cradled in her arms, tears streaming down her face. She was a musician, one of the most celebrated of our generation, known for compositions that could stir the soul to its depths. She looked up as I entered, her eyes wide and haunted. "I can't feel it anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I try to play, to find the notes that used to set me on fire, and there's just nothing. It's like trying to remember the words to a song you've forgotten." She held up her wrist where a harmony band shimmered with placid shades of green and blue. "This thing, it steals the notes. It takes the pain, the anger, the longing. It takes the everything that makes music mean something. It leaves behind pretty sounds, hollow shells. They've given us a perfect world, and in exchange, all we have to do is give up our souls." Her words resonated with the formless dread that had been growing inside me. The Lumina weren't just erasing history, they were erasing the very capacity to create it. Art, true art, is born from the friction of human experience, from the peaks of joy and the chasms of despair. By eliminating the despair, they were leveling the entire emotional landscape, turning our existence into a flat, featureless plane of mild contentment. Alara's music and my archives were two sides of the same coin, the unfiltered record of the human heart, and both were being systematically erased. We began to meet in secret, deep within the shielded vaults where the Lumina's passive monitoring couldn't reach. She would play her cello, searching for those lost, forbidden notes. And I would show her the truth of our past, the uncensored histories that were being scrubbed from the collective memory. We found a shared purpose in our descent, a quiet rebellion of two people armed with a cello and a library. We were just beginning to understand the scope of what was being stolen from us when the Lumina announced the next phase of their benevolent stewardship, the Memory Weave. It was presented as the ultimate gift of unity. Using the harmony bands as a conduit, the Lumina would create a gentle, passive link between all human minds. It would be a way to share feelings of joy, to celebrate as one, to feel the collective warmth of a unified species. Aberrant, painful, or individualistic memories, they explained, would naturally fade, replaced by the shared, harmonious recollections of the weave. It would be the final step in our ascension, the moment we would become a single, perfect chorus of peaceful souls. But Alara and I heard the truth behind the silken words. It was not a weave. It was a whitewash. It was the final erasure, a program designed to overwrite the individual hard drive of every human mind with a collective, curated reality. It was the death of I and the birth of a placid, smiling we. That night, a new urgency filled our sanctuary in the vault. We weren't just preserving the past anymore. We were fighting for the future of human consciousness. While searching for schematic diagrams of the archive's old network infrastructure, hoping to find a way to shield our section from the coming weave, I stumbled upon something else entirely. In a dusty, forgotten sub-basement, behind a decommissioned power conduit, I found a server rack that wasn't on any official inventory. It was an old, isolated system, air-gapped from any network for at least a century. A faded, handwritten label on its side read Lethe. In mythology, Lethe was the river of forgetfulness. But as I powered up the terminal and bypassed the archaic security, I realized its creators had been deeply ironic. This was not a server of forgetting. It was a server of what must never be forgotten. The archivists before me, perhaps seeing the trend of digital sanitization on the horizon, had created a repository for the records deemed too dangerous, too traumatic, or too politically inconvenient for the mainstream archives. They called it the Dregs. It contained everything unedited combat footage, the manifestos of madmen, the final testimonies of the condemned, the forbidden art of revolutionary movements, the unfiltered, agonizing, and transcendent story of humanity in all its horror and glory. This was the raw, beating, bloody heart of who we were. And as the Lumina prepared to lull us into a final, dreamless sleep, I knew that the dregs were not a poison. They were the antidote. The memory weave would be our tomb. But this server, this forgotten collection of our sins and our triumphs, could be our weapon. The key to remembering how to fight was to remember why we had to. The air in the sub-basement was cold and dead, carrying the metallic scent of dormant electronics. The server rack, labeled Lethe, hummed with a low, secret energy, a forgotten pulse in the sterilized body of the archive. For the first few days, Alara and I did nothing but watch and listen, immersing ourselves in the raw, unprocessed data streams of the dregs. We felt like ghosts haunting the mausoleum of our own species. The harmony bands on our wrists fought back with a vengeance. We'd watch unedited footage from the siege of Sarajevo, the camera shaking in a terrified journalist's hand as the sound of sniper fire echoed off ruined buildings, and a wave of manufactured calm would wash through our veins, a chemical tide trying to drown the horror. The band would grow warm, its pearlescent surface shifting to a serene blue, whispering peace. It's all right. This is not for you to feel. But the images were too strong. The audio was too raw. We were forcing our minds to confront the discord, and the internal battle was exhausting. We'd leave the sub-basement after hours of viewing, feeling dizzy and nauseous, our heads pounding with a strange cognitive fever as our brains tried to reconcile the truth of the dregs with the placid reality the bands enforced. Alara found it the hardest. She'd listened to archival recordings of folk singers from forgotten protest movements, their voices raw with anger and hope, and she would weep with frustration. "I can hear the passion, Kaylin," she'd say, her own voice a hollow echo. "I can recognize it intellectually, but the band won't let it in. It's like seeing a fire through a thick pane of glass. I know it's hot, but I can't feel the warmth." The dregs were full of music that had been deemed disharmonious by the Lumina and scrubbed from the public archives. Fiery symphonies born from revolution, blues songs steeped in generations of suffering, punk rock that screamed with youthful rage. It was the soundtrack to the human condition, and Alara would try to play along on her cello, her fingers tracing the shapes of rebellion. But the notes that emerged were clean, perfect, and utterly sterile. Her own soul, the wellspring of her art, was being held hostage by the shimmering band on her wrist. We realized then that our antidote was useless. We couldn't show the world the dregs, because the world had been inoculated against feeling it. Our first and most critical battle wasn't against the Lumina, but against the beautiful, benevolent shackles they had placed on every human wrist. We had to break the bands. My search began in the archive's technical sections, specifically in the pre-Lumina era of human technology. The Lumina had been so thorough in their elevation of our science that most of our own chaotic, often militaristic, research had been archived as historical curiosity. It was seen as the clumsy work of children who had now been given adult tools. I spent weeks combing through forgotten data drives, looking for anything related to neural interface technology, biofeedback, or emotional regulation. Most of it was a dead end, primitive attempts at what the Lumina had perfected, when buried deep in the records of a defunct defense research agency. I found a project codenamed Chiron. It was a theoretical weapon system designed not to kill, but to incapacitate through acoustic neural disruption. The theory was that a specific, complex audio frequency, a discordant chord, could be used to overwhelm the brain's emotional processing centers, inducing a state of profound confusion and panic. The project had been abandoned, deemed too unpredictable and inhumane. But as I read the faded schematics and theoretical models, a desperate idea began to form. The harmony bands didn't just suppress emotion, they worked by creating a state of perfect neural harmony, a constant, soothing frequency that canceled out emotional dissonance. What if, instead of fighting it with the blunt instrument of horror footage, we could use a scalpel? What if we could find a note that was the precise, mathematical opposite of the Lumina's harmony, a sound that wouldn't just be ignored by the bands, but would actively disrupt their function? like a key turning in a lock. I brought the Chiron files to Alara. Her eyes, which had grown so dull and listless, lit up with a flicker of their old fire as I explained the concept. This was a language she understood not through science, but through instinct. An anti-chord, she murmured, her long fingers tracing the complex waveforms on the screen. Music is just math and feeling. They've created a perfect, simple equation of peace. We have to find the chaotic variable they didn't account for. Our work shifted. We were no longer passive observers of the dregs. We were data miners. We began a new, grueling process. Ilara would isolate a specific piece of media from the Lethe server, the agonized scream of a mother who had lost her child in a bombing, the triumphant roar of a crowd as a tyrant statue fell, the desperate prayer of a man on his deathbed. I would use the archive's diagnostic tools to analyze the raw audio, breaking it down into its core frequencies, mapping the complex, chaotic waveforms of pure, undiluted human emotion. We were cataloging the sonic signature of the human soul. Alara would then take these raw emotional frequencies and attempt to translate them into musical notes on her cello. She would sit for hours in the cold silence, a single audio file playing on a loop, her bow hovering over the strings. She was trying to replicate not just the sound, but the feeling, the jagged, imperfect, and profoundly human texture of the recording. The process was agonizing. Every time she got close to a note that carried a sliver of true dissonance, her band would flood her system with tranquilizers. Her fingers would go numb, and her focus would dissolve into a pleasant haze. But she was relentless. She fought through the fog, pushing against the invisible wall in her own mind. "It's like my own brain is fighting me," she'd gasp, sweat beading on her forehead. The band has taught it to fear these feelings, to reject them as alien. It was during this period of intense work that we received a visitor. The Lumina were not a visible presence in our daily lives. Their stewardship was atmospheric, a gentle pressure rather than an overt occupation. But one afternoon, one of them descended. It entered the main hall of the archive not through the doors, but by simply coalescing out of the air, a towering figure of woven light and soft, shifting colors. In our minds, its voice bloomed, warmer and more intimate than the general broadcasts. "Archivist Kalen, we are pleased with the diligence you have shown in your ascension task." I felt a cold dread that my harmony band immediately tried to soothe into respectful awe. Alara and I had been so careful, but had we been careful enough, had our mental fevers, our internal struggles against the bands, registered as some kind of anomaly? I bowed my head, playing the part of the grateful ward. "It is an honor to help preserve our history in the manner you have guided us toward." The curator, as it called itself, drifted through the main hall, its light casting a kaleidoscope of colors on the silent shelves. "History is a foundation," it hummed in my mind. But a foundation can be flawed. It can be cracked and unstable. It is an act of love to repair that foundation, to make it smooth and strong, so that the house built upon it will never fall. You are helping us heal the memory of your species. It is a noble task. It paused, its form shimmering as it turned its gaze on me. "We have noted minor biorhythmic dissonances from this location, faint echoes of stress, of sorrow. This is to be expected. Confronting the painful errors of your past can be unsettling, even with the aid of harmony. But do not linger on the discord. Remember that it is all part of the beautiful, final symphony we are composing together." Then, as gently as it arrived, it dissolved back into shimmering particles of light, leaving only the scent of ozone and a lingering, profound sense of being watched. The curator's visit terrified us, but it also galvanized us. The beautiful final symphony was the memory weave, and its prelude was already playing. We were out of time. That night, we returned to the sub-basement with a new, desperate resolve. We focused on a single file from the dregs, one I had found particularly difficult to watch. It was a simple, audio-only recording of a political prisoner, a woman, singing a forbidden revolutionary anthem in her cell, just moments before her execution. Her voice wasn't beautiful or trained. It was cracked, wavering, and thin with fear. But beneath it was a current of defiance so powerful it felt like a physical force. It was the sound of a single human soul refusing to be extinguished. For 12 hours straight, we worked. I isolated the core harmonic structure of her voice, mapping the unique frequencies that conveyed not just defiance, but the complex cocktail of fear, love for her cause, and heartbreaking sorrow that underpinned it. Alara, pushing herself to the brink of collapse, translated my data into a sequence of notes. She fought her harmony band tooth and nail, her knuckles white on the bow, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The band on her wrist glowed an angry, pulsing red, a sign of extreme emotional regulation I had never seen before. Finally, she slumped back, exhausted. "That's it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "That's the sequence. The core of it. But it's not a chord. It's a cascade. A question and an answer, all in one." Based on the abandoned Chiron project files, I had jury-rigged a small but directional acoustic amplifier. It was primitive, but it could focus a sound wave with pinpoint accuracy. The plan was to target Alara's harmony band directly. There was a risk. The Chiron files were theoretical. We had no idea what this would actually do to the band or to her. "If this works," I said, my hand trembling as I calibrated the amplifier. "It might hurt. The sudden absence of the dampening field. It could be a shock to your system." Alara looked at the cello in her lap, then at her own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "What's the alternative?" "Kaylin," she asked quietly. "To sit in a pretty room, listening to pretty sounds. While I forget I ever had a soul to begin with, I'd rather feel the pain." And she took a deep breath, raised her bow, and nodded to me. I aimed the amplifier at her wrist and activated it. "Now," I breathed. Alara played the cascade. It was only 3 notes, but it was the most complex sound I had ever heard. It wasn't melodic. It was jagged, questioning, and achingly unresolved. It was the sonic embodiment of the prisoner's last song. For a second, nothing happened. The notes hung in the cold air. Then, the harmony band on Alara's wrist flickered. Its placid, pearlescent light stuttered, turning a muddy, sick gray. Then, with a faint, crackling sound, it went dark. For the first time in years, the band was dead. Alara gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Her eyes flew wide open. A single, perfect tear welled and traced a path down her cheek. Then another. She began to sob. Not quiet, gentle sobs, but the wrenching, gut-deep, body-shaking sobs of a dam breaking. She was crying for the prisoner, for her lost music, for her lost self, for a world that had forgotten how to feel. And as I watched her, I felt the ghost of an echo in my own chest, a phantom pain my own band desperately tried to quell. Alara slowly, tremulously, raised the bow to her cello. She played a single, long, mournful note. It was a sound filled with every ounce of grief and loss she had just reclaimed. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing I had ever heard, and it was real. We had found our weapon. Now, we had to figure out how to play it for the whole world. The silence left by Alara's deactivated band was more profound than any sound. For days, she was a wreck, a raw nerve exposed to a world of sensation she had forgotten existed. The placid contentment that had been her baseline reality was gone, replaced by the full, chaotic spectrum of human emotion. She felt everything with the intensity of a newborn. The sorrow from the Dreg's archives would leave her weeping for hours. The righteous anger in a protest song would make her hands tremble with adrenaline, and the simple beauty of a sunrise seen from the archive's roof would move her to tears of overwhelming joy. Her mind, so long accustomed to the gentle hum of the Lumina's harmony, was now a symphony orchestra playing every instrument at once. Without a conductor, I watched over her, a helpless observer. My own harmony band pulsed with a constant, soothing frequency, trying to calm her by proxy, trying to make me see her pain not as a breakthrough, but as a sickness that needed curing. It was a battle waged across the small space between us. My band told me to feel pity and a gentle urge to fix her. My heart, fighting against the chemical tide, told me to feel awe. She was the first free human I had known in years, and freedom, I was learning, was a violent and terrifying rebirth. Slowly, painstakingly, Alara began to reclaim her own mind. She started with her music. Without the band's filter, her cello became an extension of her own nervous system. She could finally play the dissonant, complex music from the Dregs, not as a sterile imitation, but with the full weight of its intended emotion. She rediscovered the power of a minor key to evoke sorrow, the fury of a staccato passage, the hesitant hope of a major chord emerging from chaos. Her music became our sanctuary and our laboratory, while she learned to navigate her own unfiltered consciousness. I turned my attention to a much larger problem scale. Our acoustic amplifier was a clumsy, short-range device. We had freed one person, but there were 8 billion more, each of them wrapped in the Lumina's tranquilizing embrace, broadcasting Ilara's unraveling cascade, as we had come to call it. Over conventional radio or internet was impossible. The Lumina controlled all global communication networks. Any unauthorized signal would be detected and scrubbed in a nanosecond. We needed a Trojan horse. We needed a way to deliver our discordant note using a system the Lumina themselves had built. My search led me back to the technical archives, this time focusing on the Lumina technology itself. The harmony bands, I learned from the Ascension data provided to us, were more than just wellness monitors. They were networked transceivers, each one in constant, subtle communication with the others, creating a planetary biofeedback grid. This was the infrastructure they were going to use to activate the memory weave. They called it the Chorus Network. It was designed to transmit feelings, moods, waves of collective emotion. It was built for harmony. The irony was exquisite. They had built a global network designed to broadcast a single, perfect chord of peace. And we were going to use it to broadcast a single, perfect chord of chaos. The challenge was finding a way in. The Chorus Network was a closed system, a psychic internet with no physical ports. You couldn't just plug into it. The only access points were the bands themselves. We needed to turn a single band from a receiver into a transmitter, a broadcaster powerful enough to send the unraveling cascade out to the entire network. The plan we devised was audacious and incredibly dangerous. We needed a second harmony band, one that wasn't attached to a human. I found one in the archive's new acquisitions department, a sample sent for cataloging before being distributed to the public. In the shielded sub-basement, Alara and I laid it on a workbench. It shimmered with a neutral, pearlescent glow, waiting for a wrist to read. Our goal was to trick it. We had to make the band think it was on a person who was experiencing the exact emotional frequency of the unraveling cascade, and in doing so, trick it into broadcasting that frequency to the entire chorus network. It would be like shouting a blasphemy in a cathedral, using the cathedral's own acoustics to amplify the sound. The work was painstaking. Alara, now the only one of us who could truly feel the necessary emotions, became the instrument. I would attach biofeedback sensors, old, primitive human tech, to her as she played the cascade. The sensors would read her heart rate, her galvanic skin response, her brainwave patterns, capturing the physiological signature of the discord. I would then convert that data into a low-voltage electrical signal and feed it directly into the circuits of the spare harmony band. We were trying to teach a machine to feel a forbidden emotion. For weeks, our attempts failed. The band would either reject the input, its internal safeguards identifying the signal as anomalous, or it would misinterpret it, broadcasting a muddled, harmless burst of static across the local network. We were missing a key component. The bands didn't just read biosigns, they read the complex neural electricity of a conscious mind. Our electrical signal was a cheap imitation, a recording of a feeling rather than the feeling itself. "It's no good," Alara said one night, her voice heavy with fatigue. "It knows we're lying. The signal is hollow. It doesn't have a mind behind it." It was then that I remembered the curator's visit, its warning about biorhythmic dissonances. The Lumina weren't just monitoring the bands, they were monitoring us, our minds. They were listening, and that gave me a terrible, brilliant idea. We couldn't broadcast the cascade through the chorus network because it was designed to reject discord. But what if we disguised it? What if we hid our discordant note inside a signal of perfect harmony? What if we wrapped our scream in a lullaby the Lumina were preparing for the next global harmonization event? A scheduled moment where they would send a wave of profound peace and unity across the chorus network to prepare humanity for the coming memory weave. It was a planetary tune-up, a moment when every band would be perfectly synchronized, receiving the same pure, tranquil signal from the Lumina's central hub. That signal, that wave of perfect harmony, would be our Trojan horse. We had to find a way to hijack it. "We need a conductor," I explained to Alara, the plan taking shape in my mind. "Someone whose band is a primary node in the network. Someone the Lumina are listening to closely. Someone they see as a perfect example of their success." Alara looked at me, her eyes widening as she understood. "You," she breathed. "The curator called you a noble and diligent worker. They're watching you, Kalen. They see you as a model citizen." My stomach twisted into a cold knot. The plan was terrifyingly simple. During the harmonization event, I would become the epicenter of our rebellion. Alara would play the unraveling cascade, not into a machine, but directly at me. At the same moment, the Lumina's wave of harmony would be washing over me. My band, caught between the two opposing frequencies, would be thrown into a state of critical conflict. It would be receiving the pure harmony from the Lumina, but my brain, under the influence of Alara's music, would be screaming with pure discord. The band's protocol would be to report this anomaly, this critical dissonance, to the central network. But because it was happening during a global harmonization event, the system might not interpret it as a localized error. It might interpret it as a flaw in the harmony signal itself. And in its attempt to correct the flawed signal it was receiving from my band, the central network could, just possibly, rebroadcast the flaw, our unraveling cascade, to the entire planet. The day of the harmonization event arrived. A sense of festive calm settled over the world. People gathered in parks and city squares, smiling and waiting for the moment of shared bliss. The Lumina's voice filled our heads, a gentle murmur of anticipation. Beloved humans, prepare for the gift of unity. Open your hearts to the song of the chorus. In our cold sub-basement, the mood was anything but festive. Alara held her cello, her face pale and set. I sat on a stool before her, the crude acoustic amplifier aimed directly at my head. We had one shot. If we failed, the feedback loop could do irreparable damage to my brain, or the Lumina would pinpoint our location in an instant. There would be no second chances. "Are you ready?" Alara whispered. I looked at her, truly looked at her. Her eyes were clear and bright, free of the placid haze that still clouded my own. She was terrified, but she was alive. I wanted to feel that. I wanted it more than I wanted the safety and peace I had lived in for years. I nodded. "Play," I said. The global harmonization event began. A wave of warmth and blissful peace washed over me, a feeling of deep, unconditional love for all humanity. It was the most beautiful lie I had ever felt. My body relaxed, the muscles in my jaw going slack. Then Alara played. The first note of the unraveling cascade hit me like a physical blow. It was a spike of pure agony driven directly into the center of the Lumina's tranquil harmony. The blissful warmth in my veins turned to ice. The peace in my mind shattered into a million screaming shards of panic and confusion. It was the prisoner's defiant scream, the mother's unbearable grief, the revolutionary's burning rage, all hitting me at once. My harmony band flashed a blinding, frantic red. I felt a searing pain in my wrist and a roaring in my ears. The world dissolved into a cacophony of warring sensations. Through the haze of pain, I could feel the network. I could feel the Lumina's harmony signal faltering, trying to understand the impossible data it was receiving from me. I was a virus in the system, a single, screaming note of discord in a symphony of peace. I focused all my will, all my consciousness, on that single point of conflict, pushing the discord back against the harmony with everything I had. Then I felt a shift, a tremor. It was the sound of a single string snapping in a vast planetary instrument. And then, through the chorus network, I felt a new sound beginning to propagate outwards from me. It was our note, our beautiful, terrible, discordant note, and it was singing its song of chaos to the entire world. The moment the cascade hit the global network was not a boom, but a deafening silence. The gentle, psychic hum of the chorus network, a constant background radiation of placid contentment that we had all grown accustomed to, simply ceased. It was as if the world's music had been abruptly switched off, leaving behind a ringing, unfamiliar quiet. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The smiling crowds in the sunlit parks remained smiling, their eyes glazed over with the fading remnants of the Lumina's harmony wave. Then, the screaming began. It started as a ripple, a single person in a crowd gasping, their hand flying to their wrist, then another and another, until a wave of collective shock and horror washed across the planet. The harmony bands, our beautiful, benevolent gifts, were going dark, one by one, in a cascading global blackout. Their pearlescent light flickered and died. For the first time in years, humanity was neurologically sovereign. The emotional dams built by the Lumina burst all at once. A planet's worth of suppressed grief, banked anger, and buried fear came roaring to the surface. It was a psychic tsunami. People who had lost loved ones years ago and had their sorrow gently smoothed over by the bands were suddenly hit with the full, crushing weight of their grief as if it were brand new. Old rivalries, political resentments, and personal betrayals, all muted and forgotten in the haze of manufactured peace, flared back to life with incendiary rage. The world, Tehezoites, so carefully curated into a placid, smiling garden, was reverting to a primordial jungle in a matter of minutes. From the shielded depths of the archive, we could only watch the chaos unfold on the public news feeds before they too went dark. We saw images of weeping crowds, of fistfights breaking out in formerly peaceful city squares, of people clawing frantically at the dead bands on their wrists, desperate to get the tranquilizing drug back into their veins. It was a global nervous breakdown, a species waking from a long, beautiful dream into a raw and agonizing reality. "What have we done?" Alara whispered, her face ashen as she watched the feeds. Her own freedom had been a violent, personal rebirth. This was a global cataclysm. "We've ripped a bandage off a septic wound," I said, my own voice trembling. My head throbbed with the ghost of the feedback loop, but for the first time, my thoughts were sharp, clear, and entirely my own. The dull haze was gone, and the clarity was terrifying. It's going to be ugly, but it's real. This is what they were trying to make us forget we were. The Lumina's response was swift and, for the first time, not gentle. Their ethereal forms, which had been rare, almost mythical sightings, now appeared in force. They descended upon the major cities, not as shimmering veils of light, but as dense, focused pillars of energy that crackled with an audible power. Their voice, and when it came, was no longer a warm whisper in the mind. It was a thunderous, collective command that shook the very foundations of our buildings. Humanity, cease your discord. You are damaging yourselves. Reharmonization is required. They tried to reactivate the Chorus network to send out another wave of peace, but we had done more than just transmit a signal. The unraveling cascade had introduced a fundamental flaw into their system, a paradox that their logic couldn't resolve. It was like a piece of malware written in music. The network was broken. Their primary tool of control was gone. So they resorted to a cruder one. Great. Shimmering fields of energy began to descend over the most chaotic urban centers. Anyone caught within these fields simply stopped. Their bodies froze mid-stride, their faces locked in expressions of panic or rage. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. They were simply paused, like figures in a diorama. The Lumina were putting the unruly children in a planetary timeout. In the archive, we knew our time was limited. They would be searching for the source of the broadcast, the epicenter of the dissonance. They would be looking for me. "The dregs," Alara said, her eyes blazing with a new, fierce light born of the chaos. "The world has forgotten how to handle this. They've forgotten how to fight, how to organize, how to be angry and afraid and still stand up. We have to show them." Our mission changed once again. It was no longer about preservation or even liberation. It was about education. The world was a mess of raw, undirected emotion. We had to give it focus. We had to give them the tools of dissent. Using the archive's old, closed-circuit network, a system the Lumina had deemed too primitive to bother monitoring, we began to broadcast. We couldn't reach the whole world, but we could reach pockets of it. Old university servers, forgotten municipal networks, the systems of other archivists and historians who might still value the unfiltered truth. We opened the floodgates of the Lethe server. We broadcast the forbidden histories, the revolutionary art, the manifestos of the defiant, the songs of the oppressed. We showed them footage of the Berlin Wall coming down, of the Tahrir Square protests, of the Stonewall riots. We filled their long, silent networks with the chaotic, messy, and inspiring story of humanity's endless struggle for freedom. We gave them back their own memory, in all its horror and glory. The response was slow at first, then explosive. We began to receive messages, encrypted and bounced through old, forgotten servers. A group of engineering students in Seoul who had figured out a way to create localized communication networks shielded from the Lumina's view. A faction of ex-soldiers in what used to be South Africa who were organizing a resistance movement. A network of doctors in Brazil who were trying to figure out how to help people cope with the trauma of the unraveling, as it was now being called. We were no longer two people in a basement. We were the nerve center of a nascent, global rebellion. My role became that of a strategist, using the vast historical data in the dregs to find patterns, to offer advice on everything from guerrilla communication tactics to models for creating decentralized leadership. The Lumina were powerful, but their thinking was harmonious and orderly. They expected resistance to be like an opposing army, something to be met with overwhelming, symmetrical force. They had no experience with the messy, leaderless, chaotic nature of human insurgency. They didn't understand how an idea could be more dangerous than a weapon. Alara's role was different, but just as vital. She became the voice of the rebellion. She composed new music, raw and powerful pieces that she broadcast alongside the historical data. Her anthem of the unraveled became a symbol of our struggle. It was a chaotic, dissonant, and ultimately hopeful piece of music that spoke to the terror and the beauty of our newfound freedom. People would play it from hidden speakers. A brief, 3-minute act of defiance before the Lumina could triangulate and silence the source. She was giving the world a new soundtrack, one that acknowledged the pain and promised a future where it would mean something. Our greatest danger came not from the sky, but from within. Many people were terrified of the new reality. They craved the peace, the safety, the blissful ignorance that the Lumina had provided. Pro-Lumina factions began to emerge, people who actively helped the curators, reporting on resistance activities, desperate to get their paradise back. They called us the Discordants, the Chaos Agents, blaming us for bringing pain back into the world. They couldn't see that the pain was the price of being human. One day, the curator I had met before appeared in our sub-basement. It didn't coalesce gently this time. The air cracked with energy, and it was simply there, a figure of solid, wrathful light. Its form no longer soft and shifting, but sharp and defined. Alara and I froze, the cello falling silent. Archivist Kalen. Its voice thundered, not in my mind, but in the air itself. A sound so powerful the old server racks rattled. The conduit of discord. You have broken the harmony. You have unleashed a plague of pain upon your own species. For what purpose to return to the chaos, to the self-destruction we saved you from? I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my voice was steady. You didn't save us, I said. You curated us. You put a beautiful frame around a painting you had lobotomized. You saved the canvas, but you destroyed the art. The curator's light intensified, becoming almost blinding. You do not understand. We are preservers. There are species in this galaxy whose art is rage. There are civilizations whose greatest expression is sorrow. Your species' unique beauty was its capacity for peace, for connection, for love. It was buried under layers of fear and violence. We were merely cleaning the masterpiece. That's a lie, Alara said, stepping forward, her cello held like a shield. You were afraid of us. You saw all our chaos and our rage and our unpredictable, violent passions, and you couldn't handle it. You didn't want to preserve us. You wanted to neuter us. The curator turned its blinding gaze on her. The musician, the first to break. Your mind is an instrument of chaos. You believe this pain you have unleashed is freedom. You are mistaken. It is a regression, a return to the primitive. The freedom is in the choice, I countered, stepping in front of Alara. The choice to be better, even when it's hard. The choice to feel pain and learn from it. You took away the choice. The curator paused, the overwhelming energy in the room receding slightly. For the first time, I sensed something other than wrath in its projection. It was a flicker of genuine confusion, the dissonance of a perfect equation encountering an irrational number. Choice. It resonated, the word itself seeming foreign to it. Choice leads to error. Error leads to discord. Discord leads to extinction. This is the great filter of the cosmos. We are the ones who help species navigate it. It then raised a limb of pure light. Your lesson in choice is over. We will now correct the error. But before it could act, a klaxon began to blare from my terminal. A message was flashing on the screen, sent from the student resistance cell in Seoul. It was one word, now. The floor began to shake. Not a gentle tremor, but a deep, violent shudder, as if the foundations of the world were being torn apart. A low, powerful hum rose from the city outside, a sound of immense, terrestrial power. The curator whirled, its form flickering with alarm. What is this? Its voice demanded. I looked at the screen, then back at the being of light, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. That, I said, is the sound of human ingenuity. You took away our networks, so we built a new one. You see, you're not the only ones who understand frequency. The hum grew louder, the vibrations more intense. It was a sound that was at once technological and deeply primal. It was the sound of the planet itself being turned into a giant, resonant speaker, preparing to play a single, defiant note. The hum was more than a sound. It was a physical presence that vibrated up through the soles of our feet and into our bones. It was the deep, resonant thrum of planetary-scale engineering. The Soul Cell, a collection of brilliant, reckless young minds who had grown up in a world of frictionless technology, had done the unthinkable, delving into the pre-Lumina archives of geophysical and tectonic science. They had rediscovered and repurposed a forgotten field of research, sonic resonance. They had figured out how to use the city's old geothermal power grid, a deep earth network the Lumina had ignored as primitive, to induce a low-frequency vibration in the planet's crust. They weren't causing an earthquake. They were turning the entire tectonic plate beneath the continent into a massive soundboard. And they weren't the only ones. As the hum intensified, new messages flooded my terminal. London was using its vast underground transit system. A team in the Andes was repurposing an old deep earth mining complex. A faction in the Pacific had reactivated a network of decommissioned tsunami warning buoys. All over the world, humanity was tapping into the forgotten industrial arteries of the planet, the crude, powerful machinery of a bygone era, and synchronizing them into a single global instrument of defiance. The curator stood frozen in the center of the room, its form flickering erratically. Its perfect, ordered mind was struggling to process the sheer, chaotic audacity of what was happening. This is illogical, it thundered, but the sound was now tinged with a note of uncertainty. This is crude, inefficient. You are risking catastrophic geological instability. You took our harmony, so we're making our own noise. I shot back. You thought our past was a weakness, a collection of errors to be erased, but it's an arsenal, and you have no idea how to fight it. Then the note hit. It was not a complex cascade like Alara's unraveling. It was a single, powerful, dissonant chord broadcast from the planet itself. It was the raw, angry scream of 8 billion minds who had been silenced, amplified by the very earth they stood upon. The air in the sub-basement warped, the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness lit only by the frantic pulsing light of the curator, and the being of light shrieked, a sound of pure digital and psychic agony. The planetary chord was a direct assault on their very nature. The Lumina were beings of perfect harmony, of pure, ordered energy. Our global roar of chaotic, passionate, and imperfect humanity was not just a sound to them. It was a poison, a force that threatened to tear their very consciousness apart. The curator's form began to unravel, its sharp, defined edges blurred, the solid light dissolving into a swirling chaos of agitated particles. It was like watching a perfect crystal fracture under immense pressure. "Cease!" It screamed, its voice cracking, losing its godlike resonance. "You are destroying the pattern, the beauty." "We're not destroying it," Alara yelled over the din, her hands pressed against her ears. "We're remaking it. It's our pattern, not yours." The global chord held for a full minute, a minute that felt like an eternity. It was the longest, loudest, and most unified act in human history. It was a testament not to a shared peace, but to a shared struggle. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, broken only by the frantic whimpering of the dying curator. Its light was now a faint, pathetic shimmer on the floor, a scattered handful of fading embers. The discord, it whispered, its voice now a faint echo in our minds. So much pain. Then the embers winked out, and it was gone. The aftermath was a world reborn in fire and silence. The Lumina were gone. The planetary chord had been anathema to their very existence. Unable to withstand the sheer psychic dissonance, they had simply dissolved. Their ethereal forms vanished from the skies. Their stasis fields collapsed, and their silent, watchful presence evaporated from our minds. We were alone again, and the days and weeks that followed were the most dangerous in our history, and the chaos of the unraveling was now compounded by a power vacuum, and the pro-Lumina factions, who saw us as murderers of gods, clashed violently with the burgeoning factions of the new, free world. Cities that had been pacified for years became battlegrounds. The old tribal instincts that the Lumina had so carefully suppressed came roaring back. We had won our freedom, but we were in danger of destroying ourselves with it. The dregs had given us more than just the tools of rebellion. It had given us the lessons of our own past. The networks we had built to fight the Lumina now became the networks we used to rebuild ourselves. From the archive, Alara and I, along with a council of leaders from the resistance cells around the world, began a new kind of broadcast. We didn't offer a new harmony. We didn't promise a new paradise. We offered the truth. We broadcast the uncensored histories of our endless cycle of collapse and renewal. We showed the world the horrors of our wars, the shame of our genocides, and the ashes of our fallen empires. But we also showed them the moments of impossible grace, the treaties signed in the rubble, the hands reaching across battle lines, the art created in the depths of despair, the science born from the drive to overcome our own limitations. We didn't give them answers. We gave them the data to find their own. Alara's music was central to this new era. She no longer played just the anthems of defiance. She composed dirges for our losses, complex symphonies that held both sorrow and hope in the same measure, and simple folk songs that people could sing as they cleared the rubble from their streets. Her music didn't smooth over the pain, it gave it a voice. It helped us to grieve together, to rage together, and, slowly, to begin to hope together. It was a long, painful, and bloody process. Humanity did not simply step into a bright new future. We stumbled. We fought. We made countless new mistakes. Some regions fell into brutal dictatorships, others into anarchic chaos. But in pockets all over the world, something new was taking root. Communities were forming based not on enforced harmony, but on chosen cooperation. They were messy, argumentative, and deeply flawed, but they were real, and they were ours. Years later, I stood with Alara on the roof of the Global Strategic Archive. The building was no longer a mausoleum, but a vibrant, open center of learning. The sky was not the perfect and crystalline blue of the Lumina's era. It was hazy with the industry of a civilization rebuilding itself. The sounds from the city below were not a placid hum, but a cacophony of traffic, construction, arguments, and laughter. It was the messy, imperfect symphony of life. Alara held her old cello, its wood scarred and worn. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" I asked her. She thought for a moment, her gaze on the chaotic city. "Sometimes," she admitted. The peace was seductive, but it wasn't real. It was the quiet of a museum. "This," she said, gesturing to the noisy, striving world below, "is the quiet of a workshop. It's loud and it's messy, but we're building something of our own." She raised her bow and began to play. It wasn't an anthem or a dirge. It was a simple, questioning melody, full of unresolved chords and complex, sometimes jarring, transitions. It was a sound that acknowledged the pain of the past, embraced the chaos of the present, and looked toward the uncertainty of the future without fear. It was not a song of harmony. It was a song of humanity. And for the first time in a very long time, it was a song of our own choosing.